Wait, stop scrolling for a second. I need to tell you something that's going to change how you see the world. And I'm not being dramatic. In 1972, a team of researchers at MIT fed data into a computer that barely had the processing power of your phone's calculator. Their mission was simple: figure out if modern civilization is sustainable. The computer ran the numbers, hundreds of simulations, different scenarios, different assumptions, and every single model pointed to the same thing: collapse by 2040. Now here's where your stomach should drop. In 2021, an analyst at KPMG decided to check if that prediction still held up. You know what she found? We're not just on track, we're ahead of schedule. This isn't clickbait, this isn't doomerism, this is peer-reviewed research that's been validated for 50 years. And the implications are so massive that most people just ignore them. But you're still watching, which means you're ready for the truth. Look, I know what you're thinking. Another end-of-the-world prediction? I've heard this before. And you're right to be skeptical. Civilizations have been collapsing for 10,000 years. The Romans, the Mayans, the Mongols, all of them left behind ruins and questions. Some collapsed instantly. Pompeii vanished in a day under volcanic ash. The Aztec Empire lasted 93 days against Spanish invasion. Some took centuries. Rome peaked in the 2nd century and spent the next 300 years slowly unraveling. But here's what's different about our situation. You're watching this video right now, which means you have internet access. That automatically puts you in the top percentile of humans who have ever lived. You have more knowledge in your hand than kings commanded 100 years ago. Climate control, instant communication, safe food, clean water on demand, medicine that actually works, music whenever you want it. These aren't luxuries anymore. They're baseline expectations. We don't even think about them. People always ask me, who's the richest person in history? Mansa Musa, Rockefeller, the Rothschilds? Wrong. It's Elon Musk. Or it was last week when he hit $270 billion. Maybe it's changed by now. That's how fast wealth moves in our world. But what about adjusted for inflation, you ask? Okay, fine, let's play that game. Would you rather be the richest person in 1324 with all of Mansa Musa's gold, living in a palace with no air conditioning, no plumbing, no antibiotics, eating food that might give you parasites? Or would you rather be a regular person today with a smartphone and a Netflix subscription? I know which one I'd choose. And if you're honest with yourself, so do you. Here's something else that might shock you. We're living in the most peaceful era in human history. Yes, really. Technology, education, and global economic interdependence made that possible. Why fight when you can profit? It sounds cynical, but it works, until it doesn't. And that's the problem. Comparing our global economy to historical empires is like comparing a jet engine to a donkey. The jet is faster, more powerful, infinitely more complex. But here's what nobody tells you. The donkey is resilient. If it gets tired, it walks slower. If it gets hurt, it limps. But it keeps going. A jet engine has thousands of interdependent parts. One microscopic flaw and the whole thing fails, and because it moves so fast and flies so high, even small failures become catastrophic. That's us. That's modern civilization. We've built the most sophisticated house of cards in human history, and most of us wouldn't survive 2 weeks without food being delivered to our doors. We've forgotten how to live without the machine. So let me show you exactly what MIT discovered about this machine, and why every simulation, every single one, showed it breaking down. The study was called The Limits to Growth, published in 1972. This was groundbreaking because it was the first economic analysis ever built on dynamic systems modeling. Let me explain what that means. Imagine trying to predict the weather. You need to track temperature, humidity, wind speed, air pressure, but here's the key. Each variable affects the others. Change one thing, and 3 other things change in response. Now multiply that complexity by 1,000. That's what the MIT team attempted with World 3. They modeled 5 core variables. 1, population growth. 2, industrial production. 3, food production. 4, natural resource depletion. 5, pollution levels. But here's what made it revolutionary. They didn't just track these variables independently. They modeled how they interact through feedback loops. You know that horrible screeching sound when a microphone gets too close to a speaker? That's a feedback loop. The mic picks up sound, amplifies it through the speaker, which the mic picks up again, louder each time. Economies do the same thing. Here's a real example. Declining birth rates create aging populations. Aging populations increase financial pressure on younger workers through taxes and elder care. That pressure makes it harder for young people to start families. Birth rates decline further. The loop accelerates. This matters because while World 3 tracked hundreds of variables, it focused on how they cascade into each other. Think about food and population for just a second. These 2 variables depend on each other. If one moves, the other follows. But which scenario is worse? Population declining and causing food production to drop? That's economic efficiency, or food production dropping and causing population to collapse. That's mass starvation, same variables, completely different outcomes. The order matters. Now, the researchers weren't naive. They knew predicting the future exactly is impossible. You could publish your findings one day before someone invents fusion power, and suddenly all your predictions are worthless. So they didn't make one prediction. They ran hundreds of simulations, tweaking assumptions each time. In some models, innovation stayed constant and productivity improved steadily. In others, technological progress compounded, space mining, lab-grown food, the works. In others, progress plateaued. That might sound unrealistic, but we're already seeing it. Moore's law held for 50 years. Computing power doubled every 2 years. Now we're hitting physical limits on how many transistors fit on a chip. Progress isn't guaranteed, especially when most innovation today is just tech companies finding new ways to serve you ads. Yes, I see the irony. They also varied birth rates, recycling rates, resource discoveries, levels of global trade, every realistic combination. Then they averaged the outcomes. And despite all the different scenarios, one pattern emerged across almost every model: significant decline around 2040. Let me walk you through the scenarios they identified, from best to worst. The stabilized world scenario. This is the optimistic path. We don't rely on some magical technological breakthrough to save us. Instead, we make deliberate policy choices now. We invest heavily in renewable energy. We build robust recycling systems. We voluntarily reduce industrial output before it creates crises. The key word there is voluntarily. We make sacrifices now to prevent disaster later. In this model, population plateaus around 2040, not from starvation, but from natural demographic trends. Wealthier, urbanized populations have fewer children. That's just reality. Industrial output peaks and declines, but that doesn't mean lower living standards. It means more efficient resource use. Think about it. If we get self-driving cars tomorrow, individual car ownership drops, industrial output falls. But we're not poorer. One car just serves dozens of households instead of one. This is what the World Economic Forum meant by "you'll own nothing and be happy." They either don't understand optics or enjoy making people angry. More efficient resource use also reduces pollution and prevents raw materials from running out. Of all the models, this was the most optimistic. And here's the gut punch. It required action in the 1970s and 80s that never happened. The comprehensive technology scenario. This is the innovation saves us path. We keep living like we do now, but technology advances fast enough to keep up. Food production drops due to pollution and land misuse, but innovation compensates. Vertical farming, lab-grown meat, advanced fertilizers. Pollution decreases through carbon capture and cleaner energy. Resource extraction becomes more efficient. This outcome isn't terrible. Growth might slow, but society doesn't collapse. But here's the problem. This scenario assumes breakthrough innovations that don't exist yet. We're betting everything on technologies we haven't invented. That's not a strategy. That's hope. And hope is not a plan. Business as usual. 2. This is the collapse scenario. And according to the 2021 follow-up study by Gaia Harrington, this is the path we're actually on. Let me be very clear about what this model predicts. Pollution continues rising exponentially. Recycling never becomes economically viable or widely implemented. Industrial output reaches higher levels than in other scenarios. That's where the good news ends. Food production drops. Not gradually, sharply. In wealthy countries, people respond to economic pressure by having even fewer children. Birth rates plummet. In poor countries, people just starve. Fewer young workers mean industrial output starts declining, economic prosperity falls, resources become scarce because the easy-to-access stuff is gone. This creates another feedback loop. Less industrial output means less ability to develop new technology. Less technology means less ability to access resources. Less resources means even less industrial output. It's a death spiral. By every measure, this is societal collapse. I said earlier, I'd rather be middle class today than a king 150 years ago. If this model plays out, I'd rather be middle class today than a king 20 years from now. That's not hyperbole. That's what the data shows. Now, I want you to take a breath, because if this is heavy, you might be thinking, okay, but this is just a model from 1972. Things have changed. You're right. Things have changed. They've gotten worse. In 2020, Gaia Harrington, a sustainability analyst at KPMG, decided to test MIT's predictions against real-world data. She took 5 decades of actual statistics, population growth rates, resource extraction data, pollution measurements, agricultural output, industrial production indices. Then she overlaid them onto MIT's original projections. The fit was almost perfect. Not for the optimistic scenarios, not for the technology saves us path. For business as usual. 2. The collapse scenario. Let me put this in human terms. If you were born in 1990, you grew up in the wealthiest period in human history. You probably assumed this was normal, that progress was inevitable. But according to Harrington's analysis, you may also be part of the last generation to experience that level of material comfort. The model predicts industrial output per capita peaks around 2030. That's not some distant future. That's within the working lifetime of most people watching this video. After that peak, the decline begins. Not because of war, not because of a meteor strike, because the math stops working. Look at the warning signs we're already seeing. Similarity 1. Resource depletion is accelerating. We're not running out of oil tomorrow, but extraction costs are rising exponentially. The easy reserves are gone. Similarity 2. Debt levels are at historic highs. Global debt to GDP exceeded 350% in 2023. When economies stop growing, that debt becomes unpayable. Similarity 3. Fertility rates are collapsing worldwide. South Korea, 0.7, 2 children per woman. Japan, 1.2, 6. China, 1.09. Even the United States, 1.62. Replacement rate is 2.1. Every developed nation is below replacement. Similarity 4. Political instability is increasing. Trust in institutions is at generational lows. These aren't coincidences. These are the exact conditions MIT's model predicted would precede collapse. You'd think we would have learned from history. The Limits to Growth became an international bestseller in 1972. 12 million copies sold, translated into 30 languages. For a brief moment, it seemed like the world might actually pay attention. Then the backlash began. Economists attacked the model's assumptions. Oil companies funded studies claiming resources were effectively infinite. Politicians dismissed it as alarmist fear-mongering. And the public? Most people went back to their lives. Because here's the uncomfortable truth about humans. We're terrible at responding to slow-moving threats. If a tiger jumps out of the bushes, your brain responds instantly. Adrenaline, fight or flight. But if someone tells you that your current lifestyle will cause collapse in 30 years, your brain does nothing. 30 years is too abstract, too distant, too uncertain. Psychologists call this hyperbolic discounting. We value immediate rewards far more than future consequences, even when the future consequences are catastrophic. It's why people smoke despite knowing it causes cancer. It's why we don't save for retirement until it's almost too late. It's why civilizations ignore collapse warnings until collapse is unavoidable. The Romans had economists warning about currency debasement. They inflated anyway. The Spanish Empire had advisors warning that importing gold would cause inflation. They imported it anyway. And we have 50 years of data confirming MIT's model, and we're still accelerating toward the cliff. In 2023, global CO2 emissions hit a record high. Fossil fuel consumption increased. Deforestation continued. We know what's coming. The data is undeniable. We're just choosing not to act. Why? Because the solution requires sacrifice. It requires changing how we live, how we consume, how we organize our economies. And no political system, democracy or dictatorship, has ever voluntarily chosen short-term pain for long-term survival. Not until it's too late. So here's where we are. The model predicted these conditions would emerge by 2030. We're seeing them now. Does that mean collapse happens in 2040? Maybe earlier? Here's the uncomfortable answer. We don't know. What we do know is that every year we delay action, the range of possible outcomes narrows. There's a concept in systems theory called a bifurcation point, a moment where a system can still change direction, but only with massive intervention. We may have already passed it, or we might still have a narrow window, but that window is closing. The optimistic scenario, where technology saves us, isn't impossible. Fusion energy could work, carbon capture could scale, asteroid mining could provide unlimited resources, but hoping for a miracle is not a strategy. The stabilized scenario, where we voluntarily reduce consumption and invest in sustainability, is still technically achievable, but it requires political will that doesn't exist, which leaves the business as usual scenario, the one we're currently following, the one that ends in collapse. Now, I don't know what's going to happen, and anyone who claims certainty is lying, but I think we're going to see a bumpier future than most people expect. Not a sudden apocalypse, no zombies, no nuclear war, just a slow grinding down of living standards. Things that were normal for our parents' generation, owning a home, financial security, retiring comfortably, are already becoming unreachable for many young people. That trend will probably accelerate. We'll see more extreme weather, more resource conflicts, more political instability, but we'll also see innovation. Because when the alternative is collapse, humans are pretty damn creative. I think we'll muddle through. It'll be messier and more painful than it needs to be because we waited too long, but I think we'll survive. The question isn't whether humanity exists in 2050, it's what kind of world we'll be living in, and that depends on choices we make now, today, this year. Look, I want to be optimistic. I really do. I want to believe human ingenuity will pull us through, but optimism without action is just wishful thinking. The data is clear, the trends are concerning, the clock is ticking. So here's what I'm asking you to do. Read the original study, it's freely available online. Read the 2021 follow-up. Form your own opinion. Then ask yourself, what kind of world do I want to live in? What am I willing to sacrifice to get there? Maybe it's nothing. Maybe you decide this is all overblown. That's your choice. But at least make it a choice. Make it conscious. Don't sleepwalk into whatever future we're creating, because ready or not, 2040 is coming. And we're all going to find out together if MIT was right. Drop a comment. Tell me I'm being too pessimistic. Tell me about solutions that give you hope, because the one thing I know for sure is this. We're all in this together. The researchers at MIT gave us a warning 50 years ago. We've spent those 50 years mostly ignoring it. How much longer can we afford to wait? Thanks for watching. And genuinely, I hope I'm wrong about all of this, because the alternative is something none of us want to imagine.